And I now call on Kate Forbes, Cabinet Secretary, to wind up for the Scottish Government.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And can I start by saying how grateful I am for the very kind words. I don't mean to coincide major life events with budgets. It's just the way it's unfolded. And I can assure members that it wasn't designed to get out of next year's budget. Whether that's a pro or con, I will leave it to others to determine. But, Presiding Officer, I want to start today just with a reminder of the announcement that we have made to help families. We're committing the full £290 million to support households, meaning 73% of all households in Scotland will receive £150 at a time when budgets are squeezed. And even more importantly, we will use the council tax reduction scheme to target support better, so that all households in receipt of council tax reduction in any band will receive that support, which is a reflection of need. And specifically, recognising the fuel impacts, the energy impacts, we will continue the Fuel Insecurity Fund to help households at the greatest risk of self-rationing their energy use. Presiding Officer, though, it's important. I will.
Pam Duncan-Glancy.
Thank you. I thank the Cabinet Secretary for taking the intervention, and also I'd like to add my congratulations for your news this week. This afternoon, I think while we've been in the chamber, there's been comments by leading poverty organisations saying that your suggestions and your proposals on the cost of living are deeply disappointing and a missed opportunity to right a wrong from the Westminster Government. Can you tell us what your response to that is, please?
My response is very similar to what I said in my opening remarks, where I was upfront and honest about two things. That one, this is an imperfect scheme, and we have intentionally chosen to distribute funding in a way that is simple and effective, knowing that some will receive it that don't need it, but others who do desperately need it will receive it. And that secondly, this has got to be seen in a much wider context. I read with interest some of the proposals that were sent from Age Scotland and from the analysis of the Joseph Rowntree Foundation. If we had the full levers of a social security system or a tax system, I think we could do a far more targeted approach. But the approach that we've taken ensures that families get help quicker rather than later. And obviously, deliverability is key, which is why COSLA are key delivery partners in all of this. And this has been developed in collaboration, as it were, with them. Yeah.
Pam Duncan-Glancy.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for being generous with her interventions. The point about targeting is important, of course, but there are levers and powers available to the Scottish Government to have targeted the support to low-income families better, including to target it to those on the Carers Allowance supplement and to target it to people on pension credit, and also to target to families who access child winter heating payments. Would the Cabinet Secretary agree with us that that would be an appropriate way to target it to low-income households?
I certainly think that needs to be part of the package. And obviously, I announced in my opening comments that it needs to be seen in that context. The fact that there has been additional carers allowance is one example in the supplement in 2020 and again in 2021. The Winter Support Fund over this winter, £41 million. The low-income pandemic payments last year to everyone in receipt of council tax reduction. These are examples of where we have sought to target our funding. In terms of the deliverability point, we have looked at a lot of options, and ultimately the way to get funding out as quickly as possible in April, rather than waiting months, is to do it in the way that we've outlined. But I am in no way shying away from the fact that this is imperfect. And thankfully, we do have a council tax reduction scheme in place that allows us to identify those households that are in greater need to provide support to them. And again, I reiterate, I think we have time, so sure.
Paul Sweeney.
Thank the Cabinet Secretary for giving me that point. Just at the first stage of the budget, the Cabinet Secretary announced that she was giving councils the option to raise council tax as an option to offset budget cuts. Given that her announcement of additional funding would only account for a third of the proposed cuts, surely that means that if any councils do choose to increase the council tax, it will wipe out at a stroke any additional support coming down from this measure.
Can I dispute the premise of that point? We did not give councils the discretion over council tax for any reason beyond the fact that they have been asking for that discretion for years. I don't think there has been a single budget call with COSLA that I've been in where they have not raised specifically the request to get discretion. And in terms of the position for local authorities, I was going to come on to that because it is a point that has been raised a number of times in this debate already in terms of the final position for council, so I will come on to that. Presiding Officer, this budget, which all parties will have the opportunity to vote on at 5 p.m. today, is a budget that is about tackling inequalities. There is £3.9 billion for benefits next year to provide support to over 1 million people. There is £197 million to deliver the Scottish Child Payment, doubling it to £20 a week. This budget will continue to tackle homelessness with £831.5 million towards the delivery of more affordable housing. And it's got £200 million for the Scottish Attainment Challenge as part of a commitment to provide £1 billion over the Parliament to tackle the poverty-related attainment gap. We all know what the major challenges are, and I would thank Paul Sweeney for raising the point that the Joseph Rowntree Foundation has made clear that the impact of the current cost of living will disproportionately impact some families, lower income families, and that is why this holistic approach to providing more targeted help is so critically important. Presiding Officer, can I pick up on some other points that were raised by colleagues? Because all members, I think, talked, or all parties at least, talked about local government. And I think Miles Briggs did illustrate, in my mind, a central point that it's the heart of the debate on local government, that social care is a key part of local government's responsibilities. And the funding for it, therefore, is a key part of the overall settlement. But a lot of parties exclude that when talking about the settlement, because for local government, this budget will deliver a real terms growth to the settlement. It will protect the core budget, which increases by £120 million in cash terms. But over and above that, we will see £354 million for health and social care integration, £200 million to support investment in health and social care, £145 million for additional teachers and support staff, as well as significant funding for the child bridging payments, as well as rolling out free school meals. Yes, I will.
Graham Simpson.
Can I thank the Cabinet Secretary for taking the intervention. If the budget is so good for local government, can she name any councils that are not having to put up council tax?
Cabinet Secretary.
We have provided additional £120 million so that no council has to deliver inflationary-busting council tax increases. But the point I'm making here is that when members debate the local government settlement, they are excluding the very point that Miles Briggs was putting to me, quite legitimately, about the fact that social care is under pressure. We have increased funding for social care as part of our renewed commitment to pass on health consequentials, not just to the health service, but to social care as well, and that is excluded in much of the debate and discussion. Presiding Officer, Labour have rightly, I think, over the last few years, and again this year, highlighted the need for us to support carers. The budget that Labour will vote against tonight increases carers' pay by 10.5% over the last year. That is a 10.5% increase in carers' pay, precisely for the reasons that I think Daniel Johnson quite rightly outlined, that to build resilience into the social care system, we need to make sure that carers are rewarded and remunerated rightly. And there's obviously a clear commitment too, as part of the National Care Service, to build in collective bargaining. Presiding Officer, all parties have indicated and identified the need to invest in economic recovery, and that's why we are doing precisely that. Murdo Fraser talked about business support, as others did. He also talked about the Omicron impact on hospitality businesses. Hospitality businesses in Scotland that weren't paying a penny of rates under the SNP. Hospitality businesses in England under the Conservatives were paying rates. So it's all right to talk about the need to extend non-domestic rates relief. But when businesses needed it, the SNP government ensured they had support, and the same cannot be said for the UK government. Presiding Officer, ultimately, when it comes to supporting the economy, there has been much debate about the need for some game-changing policies that accelerate growth. And my plea would be to actually deliver on that rhetoric in terms of ideas, concrete ideas, tangible ideas, because there is much in the way of denigrating and criticising, very little in the way of tangible policies that the other parties have put forward, which will accelerate the growth that they call for. Presiding Officer, I was going to go through the contributions that were made by other parties, but I won't suffice, apart from making two quick comments. One, Michelle Thompson talked, I think, very helpfully about the challenges that we face, but also some of the hypocrisy. She talked, for example, about waste, and all of us have seen the reports of the £4.9 billion of fraudulent business loans under the UK Government and the £8.7 billion of PPE written off. So in terms of waste, perhaps the Conservatives would start with their own colleagues. And Jamie Halcrow-Johnson made a point about Highlands and Islands Enterprise that I want to ensure the answer is on the record. The enterprise agencies have seen record level of funding, the highest level of funding since 2010-2011, because of the critical role that they play in economic recovery. And HIE plays an absolutely essential role in the Highlands and Islands economic recovery. That is why we've maintained their spending power. And what Jamie Halcrow-Johnson referred to as a reduction is a non-cash reduction. That is about accounting charges like depreciation. And I want to make sure it's clear that this is about protecting our enterprise agencies. Lastly, and perhaps not least, Paul McLennan talked about the wider economic impacts that we are all contending with. And he did talk about the impact of Brexit, the impact of the cumulative costs on businesses. And it reminds me of the labour shortages debate we had a few weeks ago, when on one hand Conservatives were at pains to say Brexit's not the problem, labour shortages are there in France as well, but in the same breath blame all their economic woes on the SNP. You cannot have it both ways. And speaking directly to businesses, it's quite clear where much of these challenges are coming from. And so, Presiding Officer, having endeavoured to take us right up to 5 o'clock at, I think, the request of filling time, I am delighted to commend the budget to the Chamber this afternoon. It is a budget that is ambitious, it's a budget that's bold, it's an ambitious budget that delivers for the people of Scotland, highlighting their priorities and ensuring that as a government we are quick to respond to the needs that have emerged since the 9th of December.
Thank you. That concludes the debate on Budget Scotland Bill. It's now time to move on to the next